Hi, I'm Arthur. And one of the most recognizable concepts in the game of 40k is the Death Corps of Krieg. They are a faction that is super beloved by the fans and are super well known with even a passing glance. And to be 100% with you, in terms of factions of guardsmen, you have roughly 3 factions people think about immediately upon considering the Imperial Guard. And that is 1, the Cadians, 2, the Catechans, and no, I will not say Catachan. And then you have the Death Corps of Krieg. There is a lot of reasons as to why the Death Corps of Krieg is well known, but I don't really care about why they're well known, because you could just point to the Siege of Rax and say that they played an important part in that and they left an impression. I want to discuss more why people like them, because for me, personally, I prefer the Steel Legion of Armageddon, which aesthetically is very similar to the Kriegsmen. And before you history nerds discuss with me how the inspiration for both are radically different, and I'm just being reductive by pointing at the 2 men in gas masks and going they're the same image, I'll have you know, I do not care. I just don't care. So before we discuss the appeal of the Kriegsmen, I'll give a quick rundown of their lore, because most of you already probably know it already, and there are many other better discussion videos about their lore. Basically, they were a faction of guardsmen on a planet that, after planning to secede from the Imperium of mankind, erupted in an all-out civil war, which lasted quite a long-ass time and ended up with the planet being blasted by enough nuclear weapons that when the sun sets, it glows in the dark. Which is not exactly a good way to breed happy people, but hard times make strong people, and the loyalist Death Corps of Krieg won the war and ended up being some of the most efficient soldiers in the universe, rivaling that of the all-purpose goodness of the Cadian shock troopers. But with the modified military structure that was bred from the way they lived for such a long time on their home planet of Krieg. Let's give them some points here as to why people like them, because this is the first point I'm going to cover, and that is that they are in fact very much an outlier and have an incredibly different aesthetic from the rest of the guardsmen regiments. Yes, I know I said they were similar to that of the Steel Legion, but that was more of a jest than anything else. The structure of their army, the tactics they use, and the outfits they wear are just sleek and very much eye-catching in comparison to the more US military-inspired flak armors of the Cadians and most other guardsmen, though that's not to say that they look similar to every guardsman. It's one of the reasons why my favorite guardsman regiments are always the weirder looking ones, like the Vestroyan Firstborn, the Maccabian Janissary, and a few others, to name a few, are just really cool looking regiments. So aesthetics aside, what separates them the most is their tactics. See, they are what is referred to as a death cult, where from a young age a Kriegsman is taught that there is nothing more noble than to die in service to the Emperor. So they will often have 0 chances of morale breaking in combat because they want to die. It's gotten to the point where morale boost style executions are rarely done, and the commissars are often used as a bit more of a pseudo-leadership position for their squads and threaten to murder people if they are a little bit too gung-ho about jumping into the fray and dying for a noble cause. See, the Death Corps are actually mass-produced using pretty heretical technology that could be either interpreted as mass-produced clones, which is yikes, but also, you know what, good on you, or mass-produced artificial insemination-style test tube babies that are taking eggs and sperm from donors in order to make a new child. Because they all wear masks, it's kind of hard to tell, but also because they have masks, it's hard to give them all a sense of self, and that sense of self is actually dulled down for the purpose of making them better soldiers. It gives them a very grim sense of determination in the face of the worst threats imaginable. They will not falter, even if it means dying by the millions. Which is both a good thing and a bad. Before I get into the bad of it, I want to address a rumor that is often spread as real information when it's not as accurate as it could be. So it's a very common understanding that Kriegsmen have numbers instead of names, which is relatively true, though Kriegsmen do often also have names, and they do even have named characters that appear in stories from time to time. It is rare for a Kriegsman to really self-identify as anything other than a cog for the machine of war. I have seen examples of them having personalities and even names. I know in Book 2 of the Uriel Ventris series, a small regiment of Krieg are a main factor of that war against the Tyranids that occurred in the book itself, and there were a few named individuals with very discernible personalities. It fit the characterization of Kriegsmen very well. I remember there was a commander who was brisk, impatient, and willing to get his job done at any cost, but he knew the importance of staying alive in the face of certain death. It did fly in the face of the overly fanatical divisions that the Krieg have gotten over the years. I think, like the majority of the lore, it has kind of become a bit lost by the wayside, where the interpretation that the authors have and that the interpretation of what the fans have are kind of the end posts of where the actual interpretation is, where it's often in the middle of what those two interpretations are. But while we are on this topic, one of the bad things that can happen from unthinking, shovel-wielding, trench-digging maniacs obsessed with victory is kind of found in this same book. You find out that they bear suffering they should not for the sake of group efficiency. So what do I mean by this? Well, when you want to die for the Emperor and are planning on doing so in the coming battle, why should you care about being a little cold and a little hungry in the snow, right? There was a medic who was tending to a lot of Kriegsmen who were taken out of the fight prematurely because they didn't do the proper precautions for frostbite prep, because they believed that it wouldn't matter, when in fact they were taken out of the fight almost permanently due to a missing limb. Which is kind of a big issue when it comes to war. And it's that they're very competent, but cut corners in all things that don't directly involve with warfare, which leads to a lot of issues of disease, malnutrition, and other things that often go overlooked. Another thing that coincides this specific negative is obviously their notoriously horrendously bad people skills, which goes without saying. It's like trying to have a conversation with an Iron Warrior. It's just not going to go well. It has led to them demanding a high level of performance from planets that they end up trying to save or are sent there from Imperial command, and ending up having to execute too many people because they're not meeting their exacting expectations. With that in mind, let's start covering the good side of things. Because, you deserve a treat after eating your veggies, so a little bit of positive with the negative we just covered. The Kriegsmen are one of the most efficient and pragmatic regiments of guardsmen in the setting. They are able to establish bunkers, trenches, and mortar brigades in such a fast succession of time that it actually will cause most people to second guess even being in the same system as them. Think of them as the same way that Great Crusade era Dark Angels were seen, where just the idea that the Dark Angels might show up is enough for people to stop fighting and give up. Another big one is, even though they are just humans, due to their sense of absolute desire to die in war, they themselves feel no fear when fighting against things that people would even cry to know exist. Like, I'm talking, we have them fighting Cornate Berserkers of the World Eaters with the same fervor they would show to just a traitor guardsman. It's kind of insane the level of shit that you'd be able to get done with just a platoon of these dudes. Spider-webbed trenches, as that is kind of their deal. They like trenches, which also, by the way, they are all equipped with an E-tool, which is just a bladed, serrated shovel, which has provided many a good meme, I shall note. But to be honest, the E-tool shovel charge is a pretty badass thing, right? So I feel it's one of the cooler aesthetical things that the Krieg have going for them, right? It's just really cool. They fight like monsters, they die like heroes, and are not afraid to call in a mortar strike on their position many, many times over. So, with that in mind, let's start winding into my final points here. So, what is the reason the Death Corps of Krieg are so loved above all other guardsmen regiments? They have an almost fanatical fan base that people tend to overly obsess over, in my opinion. They are loved for a lot of the same reasons that the Iron Warriors are loved. They are hyper-pragmatists with a single-minded determination to put you in the ground in as quick a fashion as humanly possible. Though the Death Corps Corps of Krieg do not share that same level of ultimate bitterness that the Iron Warriors have. There is a degree of cynical heroism that I think most people can enjoy. As anyone would agree with, we do tend to romanticize the idea of heroic sacrifice so that your band of brothers can survive harrowing circumstances. I know I've had dreams like that before after reading a good Imperial Guard book. And that is what the Krieg are that separate them from the Iron Warriors. Though these kinds of sacrifices are often more or less just done out of blind efficiency, and it's usually better to die spitefully, mortar shelling the area to kill a small platoon, than it is to kill one guy with a bayonet or a shovel and then try to leave to get back to your comrades. They are trench specialists like the Iron Warriors, and trench warfare is just cool. They like sieges, and they like using long-range artillery in order to mow down as many people as humanly possible. In most forms of combat, they are probably one of the most reliable tools in a general's tool belt. And because of this, it makes them have an almost untouchable feeling. It's this feeling mixed with the fact that they are kind of a good personification of the grim darkness of 40K's military might that I think pushes them ahead of other people in the Imperial Guard. They have a similar aesthetic to that of the armored duders from Jinro, which I think is interesting because they pull from the same inspiration for their aesthetics. So, in short, people like the Krieg because they exemplify the portions of the setting that people enjoy the most outside of the main elements that are included in the Space Marines. They are grimdark warriors that fight and die in the same breaths without a care. They are a resource to be expended. When you have so many bodies, life is cheap, and they will spend it however they please. If you ever want to know more about the Death Corps, then please go read The Siege of Vrax. It's really, really cool. It has so many fun lore tidbits of how the Death Corps of Krieg, if they're put into the type of fight that they want to do, they are just the best at what they do. It's such a good, long-ass story, though, with a lot of fun elements. I think it's definitely worth a read, and not a lot of people discuss it as much as they should anymore. So what do you think about the Death Corps of Krieg? I think I covered them pretty succinctly, and I made my points pretty clear. But do you have any perspectives on the matter that I might not have considered? Let me know in the comments. And alongside that, remember to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel. If you want to help the channel even more, then buy my shirts, and maybe even a button or two. Speaking of the Iron Warriors, I have this lovely canvas print that I think you should buy. It would help me out a lot. And speaking of helping me out, special thanks to my channel members for supporting me, and if you want to support me as well as gain access to additional content, then become a channel member today. Thanks again for watching, and no, I didn't forget about the Death Riders. I feel like the Death Riders of Krieg are one of the bigger reasons people look at these guys and go, oh yeah, that's the faction for me.